Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're starting 5 minutes early because we know you're a rowdy crowd and it'll take a long time for you to... Oh, not at all. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Duncan Munn. I am the president of the C.D. Houndstitute. Thank you for joining us tonight for what I promise will be the best conversation taking place on immigration policy in the country this year. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here. There's quite a lot of you that have joined for this discussion. Thank you for taking part. It's another sellout event, and it's really a testament to the wonderful community that we have with us. Now, before I call upon the man whose vision and philanthropy established this debate series, it's typical to start with a commercial. And well, I don't want to disappoint those of you that like and enjoy a good commercial. So let me give you one. For more than 70 years, this venerable institute has been at the forefront of public policy debate in our country. Policy fads come and go, election cycles come and go, and through it all, the C.D. Houndstitute has stood tall, and as our chair, Hugh McKinnon, often likes to say, like a beacon of light in a foggy night, pointing the direction home to safe harbors. That's what we do at the C.D. Houndstitute, provide essential, trusted policy intelligence to policymakers of every stripe. Now, history buffs amongst you will know that Wilfrid Laurier famously said, Canada had the chance to claim the 20th century as its own. Over 100 years through 2 wars, Korea, the Cold War, peacekeeping, political and diplomatic leadership, Canada has certainly emerged as a respected force for democracy with one of the world's highest living standards. However, it'd be a stretch to say that that vision was fully accomplished. The work on building a great country never stops. There's always more to do. Prosperity is not a given, and the issues that we face as a country grow more complex and move with faster speed. Tonight is such an example. As we look to our long history, it's on issues as far-ranging as free trade, inflation targeting, the establishment of the CPPIB, a crown jewel in the pension world globally, frankly. The footprint of the C.D. Houndstitute is felt. So as we like to say, fads may come and go, and while our ideas aren't always embraced, more often than not, in the fullness of time, they are embraced in a meaningful way by policymakers, business leaders, and academics in all regions, in all levels of governments, across all political divides. And if you doubt me, just look at the incredible panel that we have for you tonight, who will be introduced in a moment. Now, we employees here at the C.D. Houndstitute, we don't just work here. We are stewards of this important mission. This is a mission that's advanced by a really incredible team. So if there's one commercial that really matters, it's for the amazing team that we have at the C.D. Houndstitute. So if you'll permit me, Christopher Lawson, Angelica Kakradis, Mitch Tensios, Stefan Paris, Hal Coblin, and others who are distributed in this room, I am extraordinarily proud of you as our team and to be representing you here tonight. A hand to the team who did this. Permit me also to say a special thanks to Bill Robson, our CEO, tonight's moderator. Bill is a man of very, very many talents, and as a regular MC at our events, he's used to eating a lot of cold meals once the lights dim and the crowd leaves. It's not always glamorous, but it's always important and very much appreciated. Bill, thank you for moderating again. We very much appreciate that. I was trying to find Bill, but I didn't see him, but I know he's here. There he is, over there. If I could, we had our board meeting today, so it's important to acknowledge the C.D. Houndstitute's directors in the room. I'd like to say Eric Bedard, Cyrus Madden, Jeff Smith, Rick Eckstein, Laura Tory Anastasio, our chair, Hugh McKinnon, Aaron Regent, I'll say a few words about in a moment. Tonight's Regent debate lies at the heart of the Institute's mission, and dare I say, our national character. First and second generation immigrants play key roles in our cities, our provinces, and in fact across the country, including at the C.D. Houndstitute. This debate is motivated by our core belief that a stronger Canada is one that provides opportunities and economic well-being to all Canadians, those born here and those we hope to attract here, now and into the future. And so on topics like immigration, we have to get it right. Canada needs no less. Canada deserves no less. And once again, it was Aaron Regent who over lunch really zeroed in on this topic. He's fully involved in everything that we do, from the topic, from the question to the debaters, to the jury, all of it. So what an incredible partner. He serves as chair of the board at Scotiabank. He's the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Magris Performance Materials, a leading North American-based industrial minerals company, Brookfield, Barrick, and more. His resume reads like a top 10 FP 100 list. And he's just one of those guys that seem to be darn good at just about everything. And not only that, he's extremely public-spirited, supporting many numerous causes, including the C.D. Howe Institute. But one of the things that's near and dear to him also is the United Way. And so before calling him up, I thought I'd just mention that the senior staff of the Institute all got together and made a personal donation in Aaron's name at the United Way, because we know, amongst other things, the United Way plays a key role supporting settlement programs across the city. And so we're very honored to be able to do that. It's a fitting thank you for Aaron. So with that, Aaron, please join me at the podium.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Duncan. Those are really two kind words, and thank you to the staff for the donation to the United Way, which is really surprising and much appreciated. And thank you to the C.D. Howe Institute for working so hard to convene tonight's debate. It's a great honor to be working with this incredible team. I'd also like to welcome everyone here tonight and to thank you for demonstrating your interest in public policy, which is so critical to ensuring the ongoing success of our country. The best defense against bad public policy is an informed citizenry, and this underpins the work of the C.D. Howe Institute. The Institute's expertise and fact-based work across the whole spectrum of its remit, from health, fiscal and tax, monetary, and to skills and labor policy, informs Canadians and helps Canadian governments address and rise to the challenges that we face as a nation. And so this debate series is meant to build on this work. In too many places around the world, serious debate about important issues is a challenge, to say the least. This debate series demonstrates that we can come together in a bipartisan way and talk about big issues in a dispassionate and respectful manner. And I think we agree we're all here to learn. Tonight is the fifth debate in the series. Previous debates tackled the topics of universal basic income, Canadian competitiveness, regulation of big technology, and privatizing Canada's healthcare system. Tonight's topic, dealing with immigration, is particularly timely given the challenges currently facing our country, from declining GDP per capita, anemic innovation, strained public finances, and increasing demands on our housing, infrastructure, education, and healthcare systems, to name a few. Today, Canadians writ large are taking stock and seeking to better understand whether our immigration levels and the various systems, structures, and processes that exist is supporting our economic and overall well-being. Immigration has been a key contributor to creating the dynamic and prosperous country we have today, and the political consensus on immigration has been a bedrock of our society for decades. We have a long history of attracting and retaining immigrants from every continent, and we need to build on this legacy and this culture of welcome to build an even stronger Canada. But the support cannot be taken for granted. If we fail to get our immigration policies right, to ensure the success of immigrants and their children while creating opportunities and raising living standards for all Canadians, support for immigration could be seriously undermined, which is what is happening in many countries around the world. And that brings us to tonight's resolution. Be it resolved, Canada's immigration levels are too high to support the economic well-being of new immigrants or that of the broader population. It is a provocative resolution, which I think will lead to a very interesting and energetic discussion and evening. We have an incredible group of debaters tonight, all of whom will be introduced more formally in a moment. But let me say to Mitzie, Jason, John, and Naheed, thank you very much for agreeing to do this debate. As audience members, we will all be listening carefully and with an open mind, and we know that this will be an informative and thought-provoking evening. I also want to thank our esteemed jury for participating tonight. They have all generously offered their time and expertise to explore this critical issue. And again, a special thanks to Bill Robson, Duncan Mumm, and the entire team at the CD Howe for the work you do and for convening tonight's debate. And I would like to specifically thank Duncan, who has done an amazing job in leading and pulling this evening together. It is now my great pleasure to call upon Bill Robson, the Institute's CEO and tonight's moderator, to get things going. Please join me in welcoming Bill.
Debaters, please join me up here so we can all get into our positions. Aaron, thank you very much. We've had a number of thank yous from the front of the room already, and I don't want to gild the lily, but Aaron, we're certainly very grateful for your support, and to everyone who's here. Thank you for coming for this important topic. Aaron has already covered off really the high points. I will just say for myself, and not prejudging where we're going in this debate, but we have a great thing going in Canada with the successful record on immigration that we have had. And I think I speak for everybody here that we want to see that record continue. And we hope that this debate is going to be illuminating for what the challenges are and perhaps what some of the solutions are to the extent we do need to make a change. I think I should say, many of you attend CD Howe Institute events. We're often off the record. On this occasion, we're on the record. Comport yourselves accordingly. We have an event hashtag. I think it's going to be up on the screen in a moment, but hashtag Regent Debate. Let me get right down to the important part of the program, introducing our debaters. I'm not going to say anything like as much about them as they deserve. I think you know who they are, at least by reputation, and I know that many of them have personal friends in the room. But on the affirmative side, we have Mitzie Hunter, who is a representative of MPP Scarborough-Guildwood and has carried a number of important portfolios in the Ontario government. No stranger to the CD Howe Institute stage, I'm glad to say, and welcome back, Mitzie. Also on the affirmative side, we have Jason Kenney, former Premier of Alberta, and as many of you will know, Cabinet Minister federally responsible for the topic that we are dealing with. Jason is many other things as well, and again, no stranger to the CD Howe Institute stage. Jason, it's great to have you back. On the negative side, we have John Tory, who is billed on the program as a former mayor of Toronto. He is much else, a telecoms executive, radio personality, former and again. Again, I'm repeating myself, but again, no stranger to the CD Howe Institute Forum. John, thank you for doing this. And Naheed Nenshi, former mayor of Calgary, and again, very accomplished at other things too before he became as prominent as he was as mayor of Calgary in the community, his work in the consulting business. So a man of many parts. And again, Naheed, thank you for joining us. The rules of engagement are that we are going to hear from our debaters, and we have not only the entire group to deliver their thoughts on the merits of the case made by each side, but we have a jury. And I must introduce our jury because a special responsibility rests on them. So we have Hugh McKinnon, CEO of Bennett Jones, and also, and it's not a coincidence that he's here, he's the chair of the CD Howe Institute's Board of Directors, and a very good one too, I might add. Aaron Regent, about whom I don't need to say much more, but he sponsors this event. We're very delighted that he does that, and we're grateful that he also is willing to sit on the jury. Dr. Parissa Mabubi, Senior Policy Analyst at the CD Howe Institute, who heads the Institute's work on human capital, and this falls within her bailiwick. We have Wes Hall, Executive Chairman and Founder of We Shall Investments, and I'm sure very well known to you for his work in the community in Toronto and more widely. We have Claudia Hepburn, Chief Executive Officer of Windmill Micro Lending. And Claudia, thank you very much for joining us. Professor Charles Beach of Queen's University, award-winning author on the topic that we're now discussing, very wise on the workings of the point system and much else. Mikhail Skudarud, Professor of Economics at the University of Waterloo and a recent author that we've published at the C.D. Howe Institute, who's following the numbers very closely and has some important insights into what's been going on lately. And we have Rob Pritchard, Chairman of the Board of the Bank of Montreal, and much else besides. So to the jury members, thank you very much, and can we have a round of applause? So here's how we're going to proceed. We like to follow in the tradition of another very well-known debate in taking the temperature of the room both before and after our debaters have made their cases. The jury and the audience are both going to vote. The tallies will be separate. I think, if I understand, and my colleagues will call me out if I say this wrong, but we're going to ask them to vote in sequence. You won't see the results before the results from the jury before everybody else gets to vote, but I think it probably makes the clickers work a little better if it's not all happening at once. So you have the clickers in front of you. You press a button in order to register your vote. You've probably used these before. If you do happen to press something that you didn't mean to, just press again, and your vote will be corrected. The system's going to record your last response before time elapses. What else do I need to say? There's a timekeeping clock, but I know that our experienced debaters are going to police themselves admirably, which will make the moderator's job much easier. And after we have heard from our debaters, there are some questions that the jury will be posing. Hugh, as a spokesperson for the jury, will pose them, and then we will go to our final vote. So once again, the jury and everyone in the room will get a chance to vote a second time. If I am right with my timing, we're a little ahead of schedule, but it never hurts to take advantage of that if everyone's ready. I'm afraid our debaters are also having to eat cold meals as well. It's an occupational hazard. But why don't we, if Mitch, if you're good with it, can we proceed to take the initial vote right now? You have a thumb up? So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see on the screen, we are first inviting the jury to vote, so you can see how adept the jury is with their clickers. Do they agree with the proposition that Canada's immigration levels are too high? Do they disagree? Or are they undecided and potentially therefore persuadable by our very adept debaters? I'm not keeping time personally. I'm watching my colleague Mitch Tensos, who has the heavy duty of making sure this is all working. C.D. Howe Institute board members who attended the meeting today will recall without much pleasure that after 45 minutes of our AV system working absolutely perfectly until the meeting started, we then had a bit of a reversal, so we'll see if we're better off this time. I see a thumbs up from Mitch. We now have the results in from the jury, but we're not going to show them because they're such an influential group, it might have a biasing effect on the vote. So for everyone else now, if you could please, the question is the same. If you agree with the proposition, you're an A. If you disagree with the proposition, you're a B. If you're undecided, you are a C. So please equip yourselves with your clicker and let us know what you think. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have our preliminary results. You don't really need me to read the numbers out, so I won't go through each decimal place with you. But You'll be interested to see, if you haven't checked already, that the jury and the broader room don't quite see this issue the same way. In each case, we do have some undecided votes. And so now, the task facing our debaters is to see if they can move any of those bars. So if I can have your attention at the front of the room, here's what's going to happen next. We are going to have an opening statement by Mitzie Hunter. Then we will have an opening statement by John Tory. We will then go to Jason Kenney for his opening statement, and Naheed Nenshi for his opening statement. Each of our debaters has agreed to speak for 5 minutes, no more. And I am just delighted to turn the floor over to my friend and very knowledgeable and able debater. Mitzie, you're kicking us off. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Bill, and good evening, everyone. It is a real and absolute pleasure to be here today. I loved the voting that happened with the room, but I did notice that the jury, there's a bit of work that we have to do. You know, many of you, as I was coming in, asked me why I am on this side of the debate. Because those of you who know me, it's not my natural stance. But Aaron, I know when we talked about this last year, that's what these debates and this room is about. It's about thinking differently. It's about changing minds. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Changing minds. When we think about Canada's population growth, 98% we know comes from newcomers, immigrants lining up literally around the world to come to this country. And right now we know, and we all see it, that our system is under a lot of pressure. It's under a lot of stress. So much so that it has become visible to all of us. So I'm arguing not against immigration. I want that to be clear. But I'm arguing for the supports that immigrants need to be successful in this country. This is something that I know personally because I am an immigrant. My family and I came to Canada from Jamaica in the 70s. And yeah, we emerged on these shores at a time when multiculturalism was at the forefront. One of my earliest memories of coming to Canada as a little girl was my family and I had gone out one evening and there was a huge snowstorm. They seemed a lot bigger back then. And the snows had come and cleared the streets and left a big pile of snow that was banked up right in front of our house. My two older brothers, they got out of the car, jumped over the snowbank, and went inside. And to my surprise, so did my mother. And I remember looking up at that snowbank and saying, gosh, how am I going to get over there? How am I going to get inside? And just at that moment, my dad swooped down and he picked me up. And in one step, we cleared the snowbank and went inside. And I still remember the feeling of his arms around me, very strong, that warmth. And he just was a big guy, and I was so impressed that we did it in one step. I felt like this was home and that I belonged here. And you know, I know that's what newcomers want to feel when they come to this country. They want to feel like this is home and that this is where I belong. And for my parents, you know, we lived in a single-family home on that cul-de-sac. Every year during school, we got new school clothes. They provided the best that they could for their kids. But it's not that easy these days. Whether it's inflation and the cost of living, the housing crisis, it is very, very difficult. And I know that immigrants want to be able to realize those dreams, owning a home, having a job, and doing the things that brought them here in the first place. But the stories that we're hearing today, sometimes they don't go so well. These are difficult times. And the immigrant journey is one of sacrifice. It always is when you leave your home country. But I know that there are times when they are not being treated the way that we want them to be treated. And so Canada's ambition and our strategy it's great in terms of our goals, but it is overlooking the critical infrastructure that we need in this country to support immigrants so that they do well. It's lacking that foresight. We have young Canadians, and especially those who are vulnerable, in a position to question whether or not they can actually afford to live in this country. And our most cherished values of compassion, inclusivity, empowerment, and that belonging is at risk right now. Because the more that clash happens with those who are arriving and seeking opportunity and those who believe that they're the cause of some of the challenges in the housing crisis, the more it erodes that value. So, in our major cities, Toronto, Vancouver, Halifax, and even Calgary, there are challenges that we see being played out on the streets today. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. How do we welcome those newcomers, but at the same time ensure that they can be successful and have the supports that they need to be their best selves? And that's why I am arguing for the motion that our levels are too high for the well-being of newcomers and our economy overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzie. The snow was deeper then. Otherwise, yep, nailed it. Thank you very much. John, over to you.
Mr. Moderator, I'm going to get right to it. I start from the premise that Canada and Canadians absolutely need robust immigration to ensure continued economic growth and prosperity, to ensure our ability to continue to finance our quality of life, and in particular look after Canadians as they age, and I think less importantly, but to some extent, to maintain our influence on the global stage. We cannot have a situation where we have today 25 seniors for every 100 working age Canadians, and a number that's going to go without immigration to 40. 40 seniors dependent upon 100 working Canadians by 2036. That is simply not a sustainable situation. We can't have a situation where our projections are, even with the immigration we have, to have 1.5% GDP growth, and I'll come back to this as to some of the other reasons, 1.5% GDP growth when, in fact, the average has been over the last number of years 2.8%. And that's not an argument to say you just let any number of people in at all, but if you look at the numbers, and I'm not going to go through them all here, but if you look at the numbers, absent some huge increase in libido that doesn't seem to be overcoming the people in the country, we simply have to augment our ranks and make sure that we have the people here who are going to be able to build this country for our kids. You know, I think, frankly, we're all okay. We're all okay in this room. But if they're going to build this country for our kids and have it be as prosperous and have the quality of life and, frankly, be in a position to look after us when we get older, then we need to have the kinds of levels of immigration. I mean, you can say plus or minus 10%, but the kinds of levels of immigration we've seen. This country took in 400,000 people in 1913. And guess what? We somehow managed to do it. And it was a different time, and it was a different country, but a much smaller population. And I would argue that the reason why there's any discussion of this, and I'm fearful that it is going to degenerate into a discussion about a number, and that we're then going to, and short-term economic conditions, and that this will cause us to make poor policy choices on the basis of a misunderstanding or misinformation. But I think there are two things we do have to do better, and my friend Mitzie alluded to one of them. And this is where I think we have to accept the challenge instead of backing down, as we often do in this country, and saying, well, let's take half as many immigrants because we can't find our way to do what we used to do the best in the world, which is to accept and settle people. And the first thing we have to do is a much better job at immigrant settlement. You know, when you know that 80% of the people that come to this country as immigrants speak neither English nor French as their first language, and that we're doing a poor job and thus leaving that as a barrier that stops people who come here more qualified by virtue of their post-secondary education than the people they're joining in this country, then you know that's us letting those people down and letting ourselves down, instead of just saying the solution is to cut the number in half. But secondly, I would make the argument that we have been a failure as a country, and this is a debate for another day, and I'm sure one that maybe the C.D. Howe Institute's already had. As a nation, we have not been successful in recent times when it comes to investing in innovation and productivity and competitiveness. Because had we done so, we would have no trouble at all accepting 500,000 or 450,000 people, as is the present number, to come to the country. Because the fact is that more than half the core immigrants to Canada have a university degree compared to 29% of the people who live here now. And we could debate the reasons, and that's a subject for another debate as well, but immigrants have shown, in particular refugees, that they are superior when it comes to business formation and in fact become a net creator of jobs for people in this country as opposed to some kind of a drag. But the fact is that we have done a poor job of putting the education of the people coming to this country to work. We've done a poor job, or relatively poor job compared to the way we used to do it, of integrating those people into the country and into the economy. And I think that, yes, we have to make some changes, perhaps in terms of the composition of the immigrants that come here, with maybe more of a focus on economic immigrants. We have to clearly increase our investment and our efforts back to what we did before when it comes to the successful integration of those people who come to our country into the country. But I want to just conclude by making a comment, because I'm down to 36 seconds. Now, you did give some latitude. I did notice that, Mr. Moderator, to Mitzie, as well you should have. But look, we've also got to do a much better job. We've got to stand up. We've got to stand up both in terms of our governments, but we've got to stand up ourselves and make decisions that speak to the fact that we have let our own country down when it comes to investment and to improving our own productivity. What possible reason could there be for this rich, smart country to be at the bottom or near the bottom of all the lists when it comes to improving productivity? And when people say, well, when you have immigrants come here and they're ending up in more low-paying jobs, that's because those are the jobs that they can get, because the ones that are value-added jobs, we're not doing an adequate job for the people who live here, for the children who are born here, but also for people who are coming to this country to build the kind of strong, rich, and prosperous country. And I'm watching. You have to give me a little more time yet, Mr. Moderator. I didn't get my clock out to time it. So I will just say that it is not just government policy. It certainly can't be about setting numbers. It has to be about us making a better effort to integrate the people who come to this country than we're doing today, but it also has to be about us deciding that we're not going to take second place or fourth place or 12th place. We're going to take the decisions in the private sector as well, take ourselves away from being a high-tax, high-regulation economy and get ourselves back to being the innovators that we're smart enough to be, that can create the value-added jobs that will make sure that the hundreds of thousands of people who come here, who we need to have come here to help us finance our quality of life and to build the kind of special country we are also have opportunity to have jobs that will be big contributors to their well-being and to the well-being of our country. It's time for us to wake up and make those decisions, and it's not a debate about the number of immigrants who come within reason. Again, I think the government has governments over time have carefully considered those numbers, including the one of which my friend Mr. Kenney was a part, and have gradually been increasing those numbers as we need them, in the absence of having a lot more babies. If you want to all go home and get to it, then that's fine with me. But otherwise, we need them to come here. Thank you very much.
John, thank you very much. Yes, your appeal to fairness on time was very effective, and your references to the City House whose work just sealed the deal. So thank you very much for that. We've had two powerful opening statements from Mitzie and John. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Robson, for doing what a great think tank should do, and that is prying open the Overton window and forcing a hopefully thoughtful debate on an issue that could not be more important for the country's future, because demography is destiny. Whether we're talking about healthcare, education, housing, our economy, our lives together, our identity as a country, it all comes down to immigration, which is why I was so privileged to serve as Canada's longest ever serving Minister of Immigration, even longer than Sir Clifford Sifton. I didn't quite welcome as many immigrants as he did, but I maintained the highest absolute levels of immigration up to that point in Canadian history. So I ran into my former mayor, Naheed, in Calgary recently, and he said, "So, you're taking the anti-immigrant side of the debate." So let me be clear to my friend Naheed. No one on this stage and no one in this room, I believe, is anti-immigrant. And those of us who maintain that we need to keep an eye on our practical limits of our capacity to settle and integrate people are actually doing so, as Mitzie has argued, for the success of newcomers, particularly because newcomers are those who typically struggle most for access to employment, particularly at their skill levels, for social services, for healthcare, for housing, for education, for their kids. I remember I gave a big speech in this room 10 years ago on some of my immigration reforms as minister, and afterwards went and did a news conference. The very first question came from the editor of the Urdu Times from Mississauga, and he said, "Mr. Kenney, my son can't find a job because all these foreign students you're bringing into the country now have work visas. Why don't you lower the levels?" So let's be clear that we need an immigration debate in this country that is practical, not based on wishful thinking, that is evidence-based, not based on name-calling, and that draws on that great Canadian virtue of moderation, as opposed to the kind of extremes we see in the debate in other democracies. So let me get down to it. What are the numbers? Now, you probably know the big 500,000 number of the current government's target for permanent residents now and into the future. That's not the real number. Because on top of that, 600,000 temporary foreign workers, 800,000 foreign students. Now, some of them leave, but the estimate is net. We are receiving over 1 million newcomers, and all of the temporary foreign workers and almost all of the students now have work permits. They're entering the labor force. They need housing. They need access to health care, even if they're paying for it themselves. They all constitute additional pressure on scarce social services, particularly housing. And, John agrees we need to increase perhaps economic immigration. There's also another fib that Ottawa tells you, and I perhaps was part of this, when we say that 2/3 of our selected immigrants are economic. No. 2/3 of them are actually dependents, spouses and kids, typically a primary economic immigrant. So in fact, only 20% of the 500,000 permanent residents are economic immigrants. 80% are not, and the data is clear. For those who are not, they are falling further and further behind, often into poverty, and very often imposing a net cost for government services, despite their very best efforts. So here's my point. We are an open and welcoming country. We are blessed to have a broad nonpartisan pro-immigration consensus, but we cannot take that for granted. We have to be deliberate about maintaining it by demonstrating that immigration works for Canada, for Canadians, and most especially for newcomers. And that means we have to recognize that there are practical limits. John, you're right. It's not all about numbers, but it is partly about numbers. There are only so many doors to accommodate people, only so many apartments and houses. Let's talk about that, the housing crisis. Last year, according to the CMHC, for which I was also minister, we need to build 3.5 million new homes by 2030. Last year, we built 220,000. The average family is now spending upwards of 2/3 of their income on mortgage payments. We are about to hit a wave where millions of Canadians will be underwater on their mortgages when they have to go to refinance. Average rents in Toronto and Vancouver are now $2,300. We've got foreign students sleeping in shifts, 10 and 15 to an apartment, desperately trying to eke out some income to send remittances home, often to pay for the unscrupulous fees of the immigration agents that sent them over here on the promise of permanent residency while they're under pressure to do their studies. The Indian High Commission says they're sending back 2 body bags every week from Toronto alone because of kids who cannot handle the pressure that they are under. We have refugees being told that there's no more room in the shelters or the hotels. They're sleeping on the streets in this city, even cold time in the winter. Bill, do I get the same timing consideration? Now, those who say this is necessary for the economy and our demography, look, Bill is the author of a series of papers from C.D. Howe which demonstrate clearly that immigration is not the solution to the aging of our population and the shrinking of our birth rate. We would, in fact, have to triple to quadruple immigration levels from where they are now to like 4 to 5% of population, millions of people a year, in order just to maintain the average age ratio in the population. It can be helpful, it can be mitigating, but it is not the solution. Economically, I haven't even addressed how people can't find doctors, the huge infrastructure deficits. We can't keep up with the infrastructure now. What if we add another 5 million people, 10 million people in the next 5 years? How do we possibly do this? It is a question of practicality and of numbers. On the economy, yes, John, immigration helps to grow GDP. But in many jurisdictions, particularly for lower skilled workers, it reduces per capita GDP, and Canada is on a precipitous decline. A C.D. Howe paper that last month entitled, "Working Harder for Less, More People but Less Capital is No Recipe for Prosperity." There's, I quote, "an ominous pattern of stagnating productivity and living standards that rapid immigration will make Canada a more labor-intensive economy with problematic implications for productivity and wages." Or another major paper from academics at the University of Waterloo, published in the Labor Economics Forum, says that quickly expanding immigration may place excessive stress on highly regulated sectors such as healthcare, education, housing, leading to lower welfare by residents. So let me just say finally, we cannot put at risk the broad political consensus we are now seeing in the polling, particularly amongst new Canadians, a growing sentiment against these high levels. We, as opinion elites and political elites in this country, would make a terrible mistake if we ignore that sentiment and end up jeopardizing the broad pro-immigration consensus. Finally, our Prime Minister has 2 key priorities. One, climate action, another, Indigenous reconciliation. Our large levels of immigration actually increase global emissions because we're taking 1 million people, largely from low-emitting developing countries, and bringing them to the country with the highest per capita emissions in the world. He doesn't talk about that in his immigration strategy. And secondly, with respect to Indigenous reconciliation, and here's a hard truth. When I was the minister, I was the first immigration minister ever to bother to ask our First Peoples what they thought about our immigration levels plan. And it won't surprise you to say, the overwhelming consensus in our Indigenous consultation was they supported very low or no immigration levels. Oddly enough, these communities often don't want to add millions more settlers to their Indigenous lands. So I would just say, at the very least, we should bring those considerations into the debate where they are now completely absent. Yes to immigration, but practical levels that can ensure the future success. I support the Trudeau policy, Pierre Trudeau, who reduced levels by 40% when faced by the 1980 recession. And I think we could then increase levels once we've settled the housing crisis and we've gone from declining per capita GDP once again to growing national wealth.
Did you notice how Jason asked for more time and then cited the CD Howe Institute work? He's a very crafty person. Naheed, you've probably been keeping track of my failings as a moderator. I think you have about 6 minutes and... 6 minutes. Well, we're trying to get closer to mountain time. I think you probably have 6 minutes and 42 seconds. Please.
Thanks so much, Dr. Dobson, and thank you all for being here and participating in this conversation. Thanks to C.D. Howe Institute for inviting a humble Westerner to give a few thoughts. Humble Westerner to give a few thoughts on this topic as well. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here on the shores of this beautiful lake, where people have been gathering for thousands of years. People have been coming on this land as they've been coming on lands across this country for many reasons. You know, where I come from, where Jason comes from, people came because of the water. They came there to hunt and fish and to trade, but also to dream and to dance and to tell stories, to live and to love and to fight sometimes. It's like a city council meeting, except for the dream, dance, live and love parts, right, John? But ultimately to engage in that very human act of building community. And now we're engaged in a conversation of how we continue to build community. So I've read all of the papers. I've seen Dr. Mahboubi's incredible work. She's on the jury too. And really tried to understand the economics as well as the human factors in what we're talking about here. And if I have one skill, my skill is to take very complex things and make them very, very plain. So that's what I'll do with you now. The debate today, if you read the resolution, is just about the levels of immigration. It's not, are we doing a good job with immigrants? It's not, could we do a better job? It's, are the numbers the right numbers? And are they the right numbers for immigrant populations themselves? Are they the right numbers for society as a whole? Here's the thing. Thanks to us putting our heads in the sand on issues like productivity, on issues like how we're going to build our economy more, through generations of governments of every political stripe, we now have no other choice. Whether we like it or not, we now have no other choice. So John said the other choices have lots of babies. He's not wrong. There's actually 4 options for us today in Canada. Option number 1, have a lot more babies. Option number 2, ask people to work well into their 70s as a regular function of how the work life works. Option number 3, get a lot poorer. Decline our GDP perhaps by 2% per year, according to the Century Initiative, versus what it could be. Option number 4, a lot more immigration. So unless you believe we're going to have lots more babies, unless you believe that it is politically and morally correct to ask people to work well into their senior years, unless you're okay with the country becoming much poorer and much less influential, our only option is to increase immigration. So what do we do about that? I'm going to say some words that are hard for me to say. Jason Kenney is right. When he tells us that we need to do a much, much better job of helping people do a better job of integrating into Canadian society. Mitzie Hunter is right when she talks about the very, very real challenges that we have. And I'll tell you this right now. When a newcomer to Canada, escaping from a war-torn region, is invited to this country, it's the best day of their life, the best day of their tough life. And they get here and they die on the streets of Peel Region because there is no one there for them. There is no dad to carry them over the snowbank. That is a disgrace. That is inhuman. That is shameful. But we can't blame the problem on the victims of the problem. We can't blame the problem of housing on the immigrants taking up the housing. We don't solve the problem by closing our eyes and closing our hearts and closing our minds and closing our doors and closing our borders. We solve the problem by solving the problem. These problems occur regardless of the levels of immigration. They occur at today's levels, they occurred at yesterday's levels. I am deeply proud of the pluralistic society that we built here in this country. The Aga Khan has called it the most successful example of pluralism in human history. I'm deeply proud that the people of Calgary elect a mayor that looks like this. And I've made my life talking about how the world needs more Canada in this way. But tonight I'm going to tell you something. And I'm going to say that we have been so successful in spite of our best efforts. And the last thing that I'll say before I wrap up, because my red light is on, but I'll take that extra minute and 42 seconds. The Canadian immigration system is the greatest bait and switch system in the world. We tell people, do you speak English? Do you have education? Do you have a certain profession? And then after years and years of a terrible paper-based system where you have no idea where your application is or if it's ever going to be accepted, or you go to these unscrupulous immigration consultants, you get a letter and it says you can come to Canada. And it's the greatest day of your life. They have a party in your village. And you get to Canada and you're told, oh, well, you can't actually work in that profession. You can't actually get the things that you thought you could get. But you know what? We need PSWs. We need people to work in retail. And here's the thing I'm going to tell you right now, another plain truth. That's not an unfortunate byproduct of our system. The system is designed that way, whether by malice or by indifference. It is designed to ensure that newcomers fill the jobs that Canadians don't want. And in a time of housing crisis, in a time of cost of living and affordability crisis, and in a time where we need the people to come and we need them to be productive members of our community, they can't put all their hopes only in their kids. We need everyone to be able to be productive members of our community. So therefore, yes, we need the big numbers. Yes, the proposition is wrong. But we also have to do a hell of a lot of better job on restructuring everything we do to make sure that every single person that comes here gets to live a life of dignity and a life to their full potential.
Thank you very much. You got full value out of that extra minute and 42 seconds. We've had a lot of passion and a lot of substance from both sides. We are now going to go to rebuttals, and just on a logistical note, I will, there's been all this references to libido and making more babies. I do want to assure everyone we're going to get out of here by 8 o'clock. We had a 5-minute buffer, which we have now used up, so I will ask, as Mitzie and John and Jason and Naheed in that order deliver their 2-minute rebuttals, if they could please stay to 2 minutes this time so that we can proceed to the questions from the jury. Mitzie, thank you.
Thank you. So the affirmative side of this debate is recognizing that while we all support immigration, it's the rate of entry that is the challenge. Close to 2 million people arriving in this country in a year is causing a lot of pressure on our systems. That's 1.5 minutes. Someone is arriving to this country. 1.5. So it's easy to arrive. It's not that quick to build a home for that person to live in with their family. Those systems don't respond as quickly and as easily. And the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says that we need 4 million more homes just to keep up with affordable home access. We're just not doing that. And so there's no one convener that is looking at, are we even able to absorb and to ensure the well-being of all of these newcomers? We talked about students going home in body bags because of the mental health pressure and the stress that they are under. Yet they're in colleges and institutions that don't even have a housing officer as part of the administration. Because we bring them here and we say, you're on your own. And that's no longer working. And so we have to do something about this. Canada needs a convener, and we need all of the actors and all of those stakeholders around the table to talk about what those targets realistically ought to be so that we can actually meet the expectations, that we can actually ensure the well-being of those newcomers, and that we can realize the productivity and the economic impact that we so desire. But it can't be at the costs, the human costs, of people living in tents on our streets and under bypasses, or living in unsafe housing situations, because we haven't gotten the number right.
Thank you, Mitzie. John, over to you for 2 minutes.
About the number. It's about decisions that we take or don't take, have or have not taken with respect to providing the kind of support that everybody has referred to make sure we can integrate people successfully. Because the fact of the matter is that the straight mathematics tells us that in the most important thing that everybody's talked about here, which is the quality of life that we enjoy, the compassion, the caring for people, that if we cut immigration in half, it's going to exacerbate that problem, not make it better. I mean, if you look at housing, I mean, this is what we do in this country. We sort of say, well, you know, we can't take on the challenge of making sure we can build more housing faster, and I know it can't be done overnight. But we proved by the use of something called modular housing in the city of Toronto. We built thousands of new units to support the most vulnerable people inside of a year. Why? Because the federal government said they wouldn't give us the money to do it if we didn't get it done in a year. And we did, because modular housing allows you to move on that kind of a basis to get things done. I raised the question as well, who's going to build the houses that we have to build if we're not having people with the right skills and the right desire to do that kind of work in this country, where we have a better chance of getting those people here through immigration? And I think the risk, and there is a risk, there's risks on all fronts in terms of this very delicate social consensus that we've built in this country that has been, again, referred to by everybody. The risk to me is that if we don't have the immigration at reasonable levels, and I think what is being talked about today is reasonable, plus or minus, and maybe some adjustments in composition, then I think if you want to see problems, you're going to see problems because the quality of life, our ability to finance programs to look after older people who aren't working is going to deteriorate. The gap between those who are comfortable and those who are struggling is going to increase. And that poses the greatest threat to the social consensus that we've had in this country. And that is why we need to have the people come, as Naheed said so well, because the other choices don't seem to be the viable ones, and that they are going to be here to build the economy, to build prosperity, to help us to create wealth so that we can maintain the quality of life, and so that they can enrich the country as they've done in previous generations. And the part that bothers me, and I am finishing here, is that before we took this on and we succeeded at a time when much fewer numbers of immigrants were a bigger share of the population of the country, and we did it. We integrated them successfully, we grew the country, we supported the programs. And now we seem to be saying, well, the solution is to cut the number in half, knowing the long-term consequences of that, I think, are very serious for that social consensus and for the programs that we so cherish as part of the Canadian identity of looking after ourselves, especially senior people who are more vulnerable.
Thank you, John. Well put. Jason, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, first of all, on the economy, as John said, immigration leads to growing GDP, even though we've not seen much of that in Canada. But the real issue is per capita GDP and human capital in our economy. We are at the bottom of the entire developed world in the past few years in terms of per capita GDP. Many of our competitors continue to grow on per capita GDP. We are the fastest declining jurisdiction in the developed world. We also happen to have by far the highest immigration levels. The economic data would suggest that the two are correlated. Now, we can just wish that away with gauzy references to things that we all believe in, pluralism and immigration, or we could face it head on the housing issue. Now, nobody's blaming newcomers for the housing crisis. That's a rhetorical sleight of hand. Canada, if there's a problem here, Canada's to blame. I've always said it's immoral and unethical for us to invite newcomers here only to face underemployment as their skills atrophy because they cannot get recognized in the fields in which they've been trained to work. It's even more immoral and unethical to invite newcomers here to face homelessness. We have refugees sleeping on the streets. John, congratulations on whatever modular housing you built, but it wasn't enough. We need to triple housing levels to pretend that we can solve the housing crisis without addressing the demand side. I submit is at best wishful thinking. And when Naheed claims there's no other choice, there are other choices. First of all, reforming our immigration system, as John suggests, to once again put a greater emphasis on those criteria that we know lead to greater economic outcomes, but also to invest in expanding the lifespan of seniors in the workforce, as other countries are doing. C.D. Howe points this out in Japan, Singapore, and elsewhere. And heaven forbid, also pronatal policies. One of the biggest reasons why we see a declining birth rate in this and other developed countries is the cost of housing. It's one of the biggest reasons parents can't afford to have kids, and that cost of housing is further accelerated with unreasonably high levels of immigration. Further investments in productivity as well. These are all things that we can do, like other developed countries, to address the demographic crisis.
We are seeing people get the full value for their 2 minutes here. Naheed, you're the final rebuttal offerer.
So Jason is making a math error that I need to point out to you. In talking about GDP per capita staying stagnant in Canada, he's absolutely right. However, it's not just because the denominator is growing. It's not just because population is growing. It's also because GDP is stagnant. And if you want GDP overall to remain stagnant, as John said, it's grown by 1.5% instead of a traditional 3%. If you want it to stay stagnant or decline, have fewer people. So your GDP per capita will still go down if your GDP is not increasing. And what we know, as Dr. Robson has well put out, immigration is not the full solution, but it's an important part of it. Of course we need productivity increases, of course we need more capital formation in the economy, but those things in and of themselves without workers will not lead to GDP increases. So if you want economic growth, the Century Initiative has done a ton of work. And by the way, this 450,000 number is not pulled out of the air. That is the number that the macroeconomic modeling shows us, 450,000 a year, increasing at 1.25% a year. The number that is required in order to ensure that the GDP increases by an average, historical average of 3% per year. Simple as that. Now, everything else is correct. People who come here have to be productive. They have to be able to work in their professions. They have to be able to be encouraged to be entrepreneurs and to start new businesses. All of that needs to happen, but you can't do any of that without the people here. So yes, have we allowed an absolute housing crisis to happen in our cities and on our streets, except in Calgary? Yes. It's on the way in Calgary too, I'm sorry to say. But do we need to solve it regardless? Yes. Do we need people to build those houses, as John says? Yes. And do we need people to live in them and work? Yes. So again, we don't solve the problem by saying the problems are too big. Don't exacerbate the problem. Leave us alone for a while and we'll fix everything and then we'll come back to the world. It's not going to happen. Partially because it removes our incentive to make the changes, but because historically we've seen it hasn't been able to happen. So let's bring in people with the fresh ideas, with the innovative thoughts, who are willing to do the work and make the changes that we need to have happen. So as I said, we don't solve the problem by closing the doors, we solve the problem by solving the problem.
Although that reference to except for Calgary makes me feel like I ought to offer John to write a reply. We are slaves to the clock to some extent, and for a good reason, because we now have some questions posed on behalf of the jury by Jury Chair Hugh McKinnon. Hugh, please come and join us on the platform, and we look forward to hearing the questions and the answers.
Thank you very much, Bill. I can tell you our jury is very happy to be here. We've spent the last week sequestered at the Strathcona Hotel reading newspapers with all the immigration stories cut out, housing stories cut out, and if you ever go to the Strath, I would stay away from the chicken fingers. The first question, these are pre-selected questions. Our first collection is to the affirmative side. Some of this has been touched on a little, but we wanted to direct a specific question to you. The ratio of workers to retirees has been declining since 1970, and it is projected to decline further over the next 25 years. How can Canada maintain its economic well-being without high levels of immigration?
I'll take it. First, I have to declare conflict. Hugh is my boss at Bennett Jones, and I'm also senior fellow at CD Howe. He's my boss twice over. So go easy on me, boss. First of all, as I pointed out, the research is clear, and this is primarily work that Bill and others have done at the Institute, that immigration does not fundamentally change the age structure of Canada's population. And I refer you to their papers, but essentially you would require tripling to a quadrupling of immigration levels to maintain the current age dependency ratio between seniors and workers. And that's just implausible in my judgment. So we have to find other tools. And that includes investing more in helping older people to expand their lifetime in the workforce. Where did we get the idea that everybody has to retire in their mid-60s now that life expectancies have grown by 12 to 15 years since after the Second World War? So we need to help people have fulfilling vocations. We also need, I submit, to pursue what other countries like France have done, to have slightly higher birth rates with pronatal policies, which includes, foremost amongst them, housing affordability. And by the way, credit to my friends in the Trudeau government for having increased the child credit, which I think is helpful. More of those kinds of policies can move the dial at least somewhat on the birth rate. Thirdly, more investment, both from the private and public sector, in productivity enhancing policies. And more broadly, of course, and here Naheed and I agree, we need to address the fundamental underlying issues in our economy that are holding us back, including, here I put on my Alberta hat, getting our natural resources to markets, being able to develop our natural wealth as a country. All of those kinds of things can increase our national wealth, but also improving in the selection of immigrants based on tried, true, and tested methods that unfortunately the current government has lapsed. For example, they've radically lowered the points required to be selected as an economic immigrant in Canada, and that's being correlated, unfortunately, with poor economic outcomes. Those are some of the things that we can do to address the serious demographic challenge.
Next question is for the negative side, multifaceted question. An increasing number of newcomers are leaving due to limited opportunities and housing competition. At the same time, the social consensus on immigration is eroding. Do these trends not demonstrate that the current immigration levels are too high? And if the current numbers are not too high, is there a limit?
I think what they demonstrate is that, and this comes back to a line that I asked Naheed to remind me of it, we don't solve the problem by closing the door, we solve the problem by solving the problem. And the reason why we should focus on how we have more value-added jobs, this entire discussion that's gone on about GDP per hour, yes, it's correct, we're doing very poorly. Is that the fault of immigration, or is that the fault of the fact we haven't created enough value-added jobs through our policies as government and even decisions made by the private sector to make the investments, to keep up with the innovation, to improve our productivity? Look at our productivity performance compared to people around the world. Why is that? Why would that be in this, one of the smartest, richest countries in the world, that we would have that kind of low productivity? And so the solution isn't to say, well, somehow by cutting off immigration, those numbers on GDP per hour worked are going to come up. The solution is to have more value-added jobs that brings that number up, including people who are here to either bring those skills and those jobs to this country or to take them up. The solution is to have more attractive taxation and regulation policies that can encourage that kind of investment to take place. I believe the greatest single threat to the social consensus on immigration would be a continued downward trend in our prosperity measured in those different ways. As I said earlier on, because that will increase the gap between those who are comfortable, that frankly I think includes pretty much everybody in this room, but a lot of other people who are struggling. And the best hope that people have who are going to come to this country, or those who are here, the 40 million that are already here, is to take the steps we need to create those better opportunities so that we can create the wealth and then redistribute it and invest it in looking after older people or looking after people who are struggling. And again, I think the approach we so often adopt is to sort of say, well, let's not solve the problem, let's close the door because it's an easier way to deal with some pretty profound issues. I think the social consensus, and I think it's still there. I think, yes, current economic conditions, current affordability issues, and some of the rhetoric that is used that I believe misleads people into thinking that the fact we might have 450,000 immigrants is the cause of what's going on in the country is masks instead what we should be doing, which is to challenge ourselves to build more housing faster. And the governments are trying to do that. They're not doing enough yet. And we need to hear from the private and nonprofit sectors as to what more can be done to speed up that process, because the technology and the will and the people exist to do that. Maybe not enough of the people, because we need more of them to come in and build the housing. And so I just don't think the way to keep the social consensus in place and the way to not have people get in any way scared off. A great percentage of them, 38% by the way, are going to smaller communities now where some of these problems are not as acute as they are in some of the big cities. So I just don't think, again, the answer is to sort of cut back on the numbers of people we need to preserve our quality of life and to build our country going forward.
The next question is for both sides. Foreign and trade policies are linked to economic well-being. Can Canada develop a foreign policy grounded in national interests and free from the undue influence of diaspora politics if immigration levels remain elevated?
I'll take that for the affirmative, and Mitzie's going to take the next two questions. First, a rebuttal, though. I'll shoehorn this in. John, nobody here is proposing to close the door, so let's be clear about that. And it's not 450,000. It's 500,000 permanent residents, plus at least 600,000 new temporary residents net. And in fact, there is a lot of statistical smoke and mirrors. It may be as many as 1 million temporary residents. So the numbers are not 1.2% of population. It's more like 2.5% of population, which has never before been tried on a sustained basis here or anywhere else. You talked about 1913. What you didn't talk about is after the First World War, we did virtually close the doors. And there was a period when those newcomers, mainly rural folks, had a chance fully to integrate. But on this question, look, it is a very challenging, it is a real issue. And this debate's primarily about the economic aspects of immigration, but we also have to focus on the social aspects of integration. And if we have people living in not a multicultural society, but a series of cultural enclaves or silos, that doesn't lead to the kind of social cohesion that we want. Now, I think the fundamental solution to the challenges of social integration are good economic integration. But if we end up, like where we see in Europe, we broadly accept immigration has been a failure in many of those countries. In populations that have been locked out of their societies, in many ways stuck in poverty and huge public housing projects with very little economic or social mobility, we do not want to recreate that in Canada. And right now, where we have basically zero vacancy available in rental housing, overheated housing market, where are these young people going to live? 60% of the foreign students coming here are young men. As I said, many of them are sleeping shifts in their apartments. You keep the volume going on, what do we end up with? Large numbers of young men with no yet abiding connection to Canada, unable to find housing, scrambling in the labor market. This is not a recipe for successful integration, let's be honest about it.
This question is posed is deeply problematic because underlying the question is the thought that Canada's foreign policy belongs to only the Canadians who are already here or the Canadians who've been here for a while. And that if newcomers come and have us shift our thinking in foreign policy, never mind that they're Canadian, and you all know what I'm referring to, what we're dealing with right now, that somehow that's un-Canadian, that that's not representative of the Canadian population. This is deeply problematic. But, saying it for a second time, Jason Kenney is right on this issue of social integration. It's really important. And I'm deeply concerned that if we have these higher levels of immigration from countries where, people perhaps have traditional communities here in Canada, that we're going to end up with a real problem if we're not much more thoughtful on how we acculturate people, how we help them with language training, how we expose them to others. So in the neighborhood I live in Calgary, which is, I always call it the least diverse neighborhood in Calgary, because there's no white people in it. It is very possible for a kid in my neighborhood to go through K to 12 years of education, and never have a white kid in their class. If this is the case, then what we really have to understand is that we've got to work much, much harder on ensuring that we're helping people understand the true diverse fabric of our community. That's about urban planning, how cities think about neighborhoods. It is about ensuring that there are community organizations that are helping out. And we've got to do all of this work to build that tapestry of what it truly means to be Canadian, while understanding that the meaning of that term Canadian is going to change, and it's not always going to be the Royal York Hotel meaning of that word Canadian is.
And our final question, is Canada's immigration target for permanent residents too high? Or conversely, should we be focusing on setting targets for different categories, such as temporary workers or students? Would these policy changes better support economic well-being?
So the answer is no. Our targets are not too high when it comes to our permanent residents. So 500,000, it's an ambitious target. It's okay. The challenge comes in the other categories that we don't really talk about. Who's really counting until at the end of the year, when we have 900,000 students who have come here as international students, or 600,000 temporary foreign workers? Because each and every one of those people who arrive here are going to expect the same level of support in terms of a roof over their head, food on their table. We know the plight of international students. Some of them are being turned away from food banks. So the NGOs are not able to cope with this burden. And some of you may be surprised that there isn't one convener that's watching all of these numbers and helping to set targets, because we don't have that system in our country. Federal government is responsible for entry. Doesn't really take into consideration, can our provinces provide the level of investments that's required? And then, of course, our cities, where everyone ends up. They are struggling. And they said that they're struggling, but there's no solution in sight. And so what I'm proposing to this challenge is that we provide that level of convening. We bring those stakeholders around the table. We talk to those college and university presidents who are struggling with real challenges, because our public policy has actually cut their tuition rates and frozen those rates, but said nothing about international students. So they've increased those fees, sometimes 3 to 5 times as high as domestic students. We can't treat people as if they are commodities. We have to recognize that they will still, all of us, regardless of what level of society we fall, we need that roof over our head, we need that food in our stomach, and we need that sense of well-being and belonging that comes with doing something meaningful to the society in which we live. And so we need better coordination, and until we get that right, that's why we're arguing that there should be some sort of moderation. We need a barometer for this.
I don't disagree with anything that Mitzie just said. However, we have to be clear-eyed about this situation. The temporary foreign worker program, built under the previous government, continued in this government, is a disgrace. The person who serves you coffee at Tim Hortons in the morning deserves a dignified life. Simple as that. And it was exactly the right thing to do to offer temporary foreign workers a pathway to citizenship. The unintended consequence, however, has become that has become a backdoor way to get into the permanent resident stream. So if I'm sick of waiting for you to recognize my qualifications, I can come in as a TFW, do my time at Tim Hortons or as a personal support worker, and make my way into. That's a rational decision that human beings are making. However, it is one that they shouldn't be forced to make. And we need a much more coherent strategy that involves the permanent residents as well as the TFWs, as well as the international students. And I think Jason's numbers on international students are actually much lower than the real number. And as Mitzie says, do you know in Ontario, skill testing question, the per capita student grant for Ontario public colleges and universities has been frozen with no increase in inflation since what year? Any guesses? It's 2008. What are the colleges and universities supposed to do? When I was the president of the Students' Union at the University of Calgary, we had a massive debate on whether to increase the percentage of international students from 5% to 7%. Do you know what the percentage at Centennial College in Scarborough, a place where you have a lot of people who need college education? Do you know what the percentage is at Centennial College? 60%. I was in Sault Ste. Marie earlier this year, Algoma University, similar numbers. Not to say that Canadian universities should not be providing opportunities to these international students. Of course we should. And of course, if you work here, you should be able to do your co-op internships here. You should have a path to citizenship when you graduate. But far too many of these private colleges, these unscrupulous immigration consultants that Jason speaks of, have been exploiting these students. So you have international students who are spending $37,000 a year in tuition, who cannot work as of today more than 20 hours a week off campus. How do we do that? How do we build that system so that it's fair to them and fair to the economy? So what I would say is, it's not that the numbers are too much, but we have to be honest, and we have to be able to say all three of these streams are working together, all three of them lead to permanent residency, and we have to determine what the right level is overall while we're not exploiting people and we're allowing people to live lives of dignity.
Hugh and the jury, thank you very much for your thought that went into those questions. I trust everyone in the room found the questions and the answers to them both enlightening and moving in many cases. That was very strong. We are now already, I don't know about you, I could go on a lot longer, but we do need to get on to the closing remarks, for which we have asked each of our debaters to provide 4 minutes of commentary addressing the existing points. It's bad form to introduce new material in the conclusion, but we'll see if anybody does it elegantly enough to get away with it. And we're going to go in reverse order to how we opened up. So Naheed Nenshi is first, then we'll go to Jason Kenney, then we'll go to John Tory, and we will close with Mitzie Hunter. Naheed, you've just gotten warmed up, so on you go.
Third time. Jason Kenney is right.
Oh, that's it.
3 times. We have something very special in Canada, and that is that despite the populist change of governments and oppositions around the world, we have no credible political party in Canada that is taking an anti-immigration stance. That's a big deal. But it's a big deal precisely because even though we see social acceptance of immigration levels starting to decline in ways we haven't seen in a long time, even though there may be some political gain in taking an anti-immigration stance, the political parties, the credible political parties, will not go there. And it's not because they're nice people. It's because they understand the economic imperative. It's because they understand that if they come out strongly anti-immigration and we cut our numbers of immigrants coming to this country, then when they're up for re-election in 4 years and there are massive labor shortages and the economy has stagnated or stalled, then they won't get re-elected. It's as simple as that. So even the folks who ought to be more anti-immigrant have accepted this in our political elites. But the social recognition and acceptance of immigration is still a very big challenge. Let me tell you what scares me. What scares me is that regardless of what level of immigrants we bring into this country, if we don't fundamentally change how we do language training, if we don't fundamentally change, and Jason Kenney, by the way, is a hero for what he's done in this area, if we don't fundamentally change the accreditation of foreign skilled professionals into the community so people can work in the area they've dreamed to work in, and if we don't encourage everyone who comes to this country to learn about people different than them, if the schools are not full of kids from different backgrounds, then we're running a very real risk. And when we look at a country like Sweden, for example, where it has been extremely difficult for Muslim immigrants to really be able to integrate into the broader society, we run incredible problems with social cohesion. So the reason that I raise all of that is to help understand that when we talk about the levels of immigration, when we talk about 450,000 a year, that's a solid number. It's a solid number based on research. It's a solid number that makes a huge difference for us economically. It's a solid number that builds up our overall GDP, not just our GDP per capita. So these are critical things that need to be done. They're not solve the entire problem, as Dr. Dobson has written about very eloquently, but they are necessary, though not sufficient. So coming back to where I started, we have the luxury of having a beautiful meal at the Royal York Hotel Ballroom and of having this conversation. But we don't have the luxury of turning this into a dry debate about what needs to be done. We've been doing that for far too many years, and now it's too late. So when you go back to the 4 options I gave you at the beginning, have more babies, work a lot longer, get a lot poorer, or bring in immigrants. It's a pretty easy choice. However, we have to understand that we're not coming to this place because we're forced to come to this place. We're not coming to this place begrudgingly. We need to come to this place eyes and hearts wide open, understanding that we're not doing a good enough job of helping people live to their potential. So, yes, we have to solve the housing crisis. Yes, it must be done on the supply side as well as on the demand side. Yes, we need to integrate people far better. Yes, we need to support our settlement agencies in doing the work they do. Yes, we need much better language training. And yes, we need to accredit people in their professions the minute they get here. But if we can do all of those things, then the levels of immigration that we're looking at today are precisely the ones we need to make sure that we have a prosperous and dignified country far into the future.
Thank you. That reference to a dry debate cannot be a reference to this debate. Jason Kenney, you've now been right 3 times. Over to you.
Well, you can see why they call Naheed and I frenemies. But I just want to pause for a moment to say, what a great sign of this country that we can have a debate on such a difficult, passionate subject, which is a minefield. Somebody said to me on the way in, I hope you don't cancel yourself tonight. We'll see in the papers tomorrow whether I have. But we can do this with not just civility, but mutual respect, applauding each other's arguments. What could be more Canadian than that? Mm-hmm. And that reflects our national values, our instinct for generosity, our belief in pluralism, but also our belief in ordered liberty, in free markets, and those things that attract people from around the world dreaming of becoming Canadians. But one of those national virtues and characteristics of Canadians is our dogged practicality. We are practical people. We are hardworking, industrious, and practical people. And so we recognize when there are practical limits, as Pierre Trudeau did in 1980, headed into a huge recession when he reduced immigration levels by 40%. Was Pierre Trudeau hostile to immigration or pluralism? Of course not. He was ambitious for the success of Canadians, including newcomers, and so followed the then classical economic theory that you shouldn't introduce more entrants into the labor market at a time of adversity, when wages were going down. Let's look at an analogy. Mitzie talked about how the food banks in Toronto and elsewhere are having to turn people away. Is that because of a lack of generosity? No. Is it because they haven't fixed the supply side problem? Why don't they just go get more food hampers? They got all they can. Or when people go to a homeless shelter, refugee claimants or students go to a homeless shelter in this city and other cities, and they're told there's no more beds. Do we give them a lecture? Do we give the shelter management a lecture about how they need to build more beds? There's just scarcity. It's a real challenge. And so let's apply that on a global level. Because it is a reality. The scarcity to provide adequate housing and social support, doctors and access to primary health care, infrastructure more broadly is a challenge. The economic data is clear. Poverty is growing amongst newcomers to Canada. Why in the world, and how can we possibly think that it is moral to invite more people here at a time such as this to face homelessness and a greater chance of poverty, not to mention the challenges of getting to work at their skill level? I don't think it is. I think we need to be practical, soft-hearted but hard-headed about this, as Canadians typically are. I would also point out that neither of my esteemed colleagues on the negative side have addressed two big issues I raised. It's just like we allied past these things in our immigration debate. What do the Indigenous people of Canada think about adding 1 to 2 million people a year to their traditional territories? I can tell you, I was the only minister ever who bothered to consult them, and they weren't terribly happy about it. Are we going to grapple with that, or just carry on with the bromides about reconciliation and pretend that is not a very real issue to grapple with? We're struggling to reduce emissions while significantly increasing Canada's emissions, with these levels moving people from very low emitting countries to the highest per capita emitting in the world. We didn't address that either. But let me close by saying, one of our Canadian characteristics is optimism. And I am optimistic that we will solve these challenges. If we have a debate on immigration that is practical and not based on wishful thinking, that's based on mutual respect and not name-calling, that looks at the facts and the evidence, I believe that we can struggle our way to find a balanced solution that I believe would result in a reduction in the intake of students, temporary foreign workers, and perhaps some categories of permanent residents, all with the goal of improving the opportunities and outcomes for newcomers and all Canadians. We're up to the task.
Many points effectively made, including the nature of the conversation we're having, and I know that won't change with John.
Thank you. I wanted to start by saying the greatest revelation to me, having sat with Naheed for 9 years at the Big City Mayor's caucus in the country, was to hear him say not once, not twice, but 3 times that Jason Kenney was right. I'd never heard that. Never heard that when Jason Kenney was Premier of Alberta. And he then went on to describe him as a hero. And I'm just thinking to myself that I'm going to have Naheed out for a saliva test after we're somebody made reference to a dry debate. That I'm going to be dry in terms of what I focus on in my closing remarks, because I just think we have to. We divert ourselves every single time off the hard decisions that we have to make as a country, because at the end of the day, I believe, as a free enterpriser and just as somebody who's been in public life but also in private life, if we are not creating wealth in this country, then there will be nothing, for us to redistribute in the cause of investing in education, investing in housing, investing in healthcare, investing in looking after seniors. And that is why I believe, yes, we can do a better job of settling immigrants. We've proven it before that we can do a better job. We took our eye off the ball and let language in this country, where we went to great lengths for many, many years to be a bilingual country and to teach people language other than their first language. And here we are in a situation where basic things like that, we're letting down the side in terms of the people we invite to come to the country. So we can do better at that. But the fundamental to me is that we have to make some very serious decisions. And I don't even hear anybody really talking about it. I mean, the C.D. Howe Institute does. Some of us talk about it at, dinner parties or whatever that we have, but nobody's really doing anything about all those numbers that have been recited tonight on both sides of the debate that sort of talk about how we're slipping in the world. We need to create more wealth, we need to have more productivity, we need to have more innovation. The best way to bring up the GDP per hour worked is by having people in better jobs, and that includes people who live here, and it includes people who are going to come here. And if we don't do that, we will not be able to finance the quality of life that we come to accept in this country. We will not be able to look after older people. We will not be able to keep that social consensus together, whether it's people who've lived here for decades or people who come new, because they will see that they're not getting the opportunity that most people come to this country to have. And so I think those are some of the things, rather than getting into a big debate about immigration numbers, that we have to start to focus on and have real discussions about those things, make real decisions. Some of them are tough. All of them are tough. All of them are challenging. And I think that immigration, to me, is not a problem, it's an opportunity. And yes, I conceded at the very beginning, we can look at the numbers and we can make some changes in the composition and make some changes that Jason just referred to a couple of moments ago. But I don't think we should just concede on these things by just saying we're going to cut the number or reduce the number, whether it be because of short-term economic conditions. That's a bad long-term decision based on current conditions. We should be saying we're going to take those current conditions and tackle them one at a time. Better jobs, more wealth created, and therefore more wealth in the hands of the government and others to redistribute. A housing solution that is something that doesn't just say, well, there's too many people to take up the housing. Let's find more ways to have more housing faster. A final comment. I think the greatest threat that should cause us to stay up at night, beyond the fact that our quality of life is slipping and will continue to slip if we don't do anything about it, it's not immigration, it's a coming apart of the social contract and the social consensus we've had with one another, because we really did believe there was a Canadian dream that said everybody could be anything that they wanted to be, through education and through hard work and through opportunity that came from innovation and investment, made not by government, some of the times with some help from government, with non-high tax, non-obstructionist policies, but most of the time because of private entrepreneurs and smart people who were able to make investments in value-added jobs for immigrants and otherwise. And I think that the greatest threat to the social consensus isn't going to be from immigration at all. It's going to be from the fact that if we allow that to perpetuate and there is a permanent group of underemployed, lower income workers that can't find any way out of that because those value-added jobs don't exist, that will be what will cause the social consensus in this country to come apart, not immigration. We need immigration. The math says so. Naheed covered that very well. I think we should focus on solving the real problems and not focus on a false debate about these numbers.
John, you said your closing remarks were going to be dry, but you forgot the dry part. No, this is very good. Thank you. Mitzie, you're our final intervener, and it's going to be good, I know.
Yes, and the clock will not stop right at the end, will it? So I just want to say how awesome I feel. Just being able to have this debate and have this conversation with all of you. And I want to acknowledge the Indigenous people and the original stewards of this land that we all have an opportunity to steward today. And the conversation that we're having is about Canada's future. It's about the future that we want. And I believe that that's a future we must create. It's one that we have to build. And we have to invest in it. And we have to do big, bold, and sometimes difficult and challenging things. Because the reality is, in the time that it has taken us to have this conversation and to have this debate, around 162 people have continued to arrive. Where are they going to live? How are they going to feed themselves and their families? How are they going to get around? Where do they go when they need that medical support? And I believe that our priorities and our policies must be aligned. And so, I'll give you the big number that is needed to meet that affordable housing supply. $1 trillion. That's what's needed by 2030 to close the gap. Those dollars have to come from private sector, from public sector, and everything in between. It's going to take a whole of society effort to meet this challenge. I believe that we need a big, bold, Build Canada plan to rise up and to meet the challenge of our ambition. We can do that. We've met many challenges in our past, and we have to meet the challenge of our future. But we cannot allow people who arrive here to not be their best selves, to not be able to succeed because there are so many hurdles that's put in front of their way. So we've got to deal with that. And as I proposed, let's convene all of the actors, including the business community, including the nonprofits, including the academic institutions, and all levels of government. And let's set the targets right in a manageable way that meets the challenge of the moment that we're in. Let's build the housing, but it will take time. Let's get those credentials certified so the people who are already here are being utilized to their full capacity. That will increase our productivity. Let's innovate. There are so many things that we can do. So on the affirmative side, we are not saying no. We're saying, let's be realistic with how much until we can get it right. I believe wholeheartedly in Canada. Canada gave my family and I every opportunity with those open arms, that warm place to call home. But when I see refugees spending weeks on the street, one of them even dying in a tent alone, that's not the Canada that I know. We have to do better. I know we can do better. I know we want to do better. Let's get it done.
Before talking a little bit about how terrific that was, I do have to say the logic of the debate requires us to move to a vote. And we're going to have some time while the voting occurs, because as you saw, there's a bit of a technological delay. So let's do that first. We've got the jury with their clickers. Jury, go ahead. You've got a minute to vote, and then we're going to be processing the results. While the jury is voting, I do have to just set one thing straight. Jason is very generous, and Naheed followed his example in referring to me as Dr. Robson. My mom was a Dr. Robson. My dad was a Dr. Robson. My brother is a Dr. Robson. I have a daughter who's a Dr. Robson. I'm Dr. Robson. I'm thrilled with the Dr. Robsons. I'm the black sheep of the family, but maybe in a later life. It's inevitable that the format of the debate requires us to look at the votes and say something about who won, whether it's the levels posted by the jury or by the broader room or by the changes in the votes that might have occurred during the debate. We are all winners in this room for having heard the facts, the analysis, the passion, and the positive attitude of our debaters. Please join me in giving them all another round of applause. And now we watch the screen for Are we good to go to the room now? Mitch, good to go to the room. So everyone who didn't vote already, please apply thumb to clicker and give us your thoughts, whether you are an A or a B or a C. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, you do not need me to read the numbers that you can see in front of you on the screen. What I do notice is that a number of people came into the room declaring themselves to be undivided, but to be undecided on the jury and the audience generally. But we seem to have had a migration to views one way or the other, so clearly our debaters were persuasive. And I will let you parse it as you choose to decide who made the better case. If you would like to stay after we adjourn this part of the meeting for drinks and for lively conversation, I guarantee there will be a lot of it. But my job now is to let you get to that part of the evening. Please join me, everyone, in thanking Aaron Regent for supporting this debate. To our jury members who are now getting themselves immortalized in a picture. And one more time to our debaters, Mitzie Hunter, Jason Kenney, John Tory, Naheed Nenshi. That was a heck of a debate. We're all in your debt.